Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver. Maria, enough poker, right? I guess we talk a little bit poker at the start, but we're going to talk about our other favorite obsession, AI.
Yeah, it's been a minute since we had AI related conversations on the show, but it's obviously a hugely important topic and one that should have been more in the news last week. It got sidelined by other news,
Oh,
but
Jeffrey Epstein. Who's that guy?
don't know, Nate.
Never met
But
him.
never met him. That's true. Never met him. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the AI action plan that was released by the U.S. government last week. Before we do, Nate, we're both back in New York, but I'm actually flying back to Vegas in 24 hours to play in the 25K NBC Heads Up Championship.
Yeah, are you excited? Have you been taking coaching?
I have. So this is for people who don't know, this was a big show back in the day. It was before my time, so I never watched it. Nate, did you ever watch it?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Before your time, you're not that much younger.
I didn't know anything about poker. It was
Okay.
before my time, like actually knowing anything about poker. So I didn't watch any poker, know about the existence of any poker shows before I started researching Biggest Bluff. So that's what I mean before my time in the poker world.
Had you heard of poker?
Only because of Rounders. I knew that
Okay.
technically it was a game that existed. But it's not something that was ever really on my radar. But yeah, this was a huge show on NBC back in the day. Heads Up Poker is one-on-one poker, which is kind of the most competitive in some ways form of poker because you're forced to play all hands basically. Your ranges are
Yeah.
100%. So it forces a very different kind of thinking. And it's being rebooted in conjunction with Peacock and PokerStars, and PokerGo is helping sponsor all of this. So I'll be in the PokerGo studios taping, and I hope it goes well. I've been getting coaching from Kevin Rabichow, who's
Oh, wow. Yeah.
he's considered one of the best heads up players in the world. He has a new heads up coaching course that just came out. We can include a link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to try out their heads up acumen. But yeah, so I've been really trying, usually after the World Series, I'm like, okay, no poker for a while, right? Just not
Yeah,
gonna, just gonna clear my brain.
I'm in the no poker zone for a period of time. I'm also bad at heads up, to be frank. Which with some coaching might have been good, but I can't make the time commitment this time around.
Yeah. So I'm instead of taking my usual break from poker that I do, I've been instead like going hard and trying to prepare myself for this heads up championship. And a lot is going to depend, in heads up the variance is so much higher and the card distribution matters so much, right?
Yeah,
So
you don't
like
get a hand most of the time.
no, and if someone is just getting hands, that's kind of that's it. Like they're potentially going to win, and there have been lots of times where really great players have been just completely obliterated by someone who doesn't know how to play. Card distribution can be a bitch, heads up, or it can be amazing.
Are those mutually exclusive?
No,
Or
no,
bitch?
not at
Okay, I'm
all.
not going to get into it. Yeah.
No,
The
bitch and amazing can be within the same match, but it does matter much more so than in full ring poker. I saw some of the names that we'll be playing, and we're doing there's going to be no spoilers, obviously. Well, I haven't played yet, but I'm not going to be able to tell you how I did until the show airs in the fall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, since it's not airing in real time. But people do know who's playing, and if I'm paired with someone like Jason Kuhn on my first match,
Yeah.
that's not going to be fun. And if I'm paired with Don Cheadle, who's also playing, I think I'm going to be much happier.
Yeah, I didn't realize there were that many, not fish, but celebrities that may be
Yeah,
fish adjacent, potentially. Although he plays a little bit, right?
he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll just see. And I'm excited for it no matter how it goes. And Kevin has been very good at preparing me for both heads up and also for the eventuality that he, as one of the best and at times probably the best in the world, has sometimes busted in the first round, right? In matchups like this, because he plays the 25K heads up at the World Series every year.
Are you worried about like physical reads and things like that? Because like that can be more of a factor too.
Yeah, so I tend to be, I hope that people can't get a lot of reads off of me, but you just never know. And this is actually hilarious, Nate. The rules of this, when I started reading it, I just burst out laughing because they said that you are allowed, so people who don't play poker, this is not normal. You're allowed to expose one or both of your cards at any point during a hand.
You can in cash usually, but not in tournaments.
But this,
right?
this is a tournament. So you can expose your cards, one or both of them. And they said they encourage speech play. You can talk about the contents of your hand. So basically everything you're not allowed to do in tournaments normally, you're being encouraged to do to make good television. I'm not going to be showing my cards, Nate.
Okay. I've become more of a speech play guy over time. Not a lot,
really?
But a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
No, like, like the Europeans, I'll like try to get info out of them. They're so quiet all the time that like I just want like any vibe I can get pretty much. Or with like really bad players who like often will reveal information just to gauge their comfort level. It's kind of in a proto trial and error zone for right now. I'm trying to like kind of like collect a mental database of like how people react to different things. I don't know. It's kind of, because so many decisions are so close at equilibrium that like any vibe you can get. And I like recently cash games more than tournaments, and they're kind of looser in various senses of the term, right? People are chattier. You reveal more info voluntarily or involuntarily. I like cultivating that environment, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm someone who definitely is chatty and tends to be like very friendly at poker tables. But, I'm not someone who's going to be like, oh, do you have aces? Like, or, you've got to, so do you do things like that? Or is it, because, there are players who do. They're like, or is it something a little bit different just to try to engage?
Yeah, maybe. It's like usually when I decided to fold already, if they want to like reveal something that they might not reveal otherwise, or to set a baseline for the next time we play a hand, things like that. Yeah,
that's actually smart. So
or they might reveal afterward, right? Yeah. If you're friendly in the right way, they might reveal information later on, right?
For sure. Yeah, that's actually something that I have capitalized on because I am a friendly player. Like I'll sometimes when it's obvious, like I've made a big fold or something like that, and I like make it obvious, they'll show me, and that's very nice. It's good information. But I do try to be careful, and I tell people this, with poker and with just like reads and our ability to spot deception in general, that we do tend to be not great at it as human beings. And the other element of that is that we think we're better than we are, and we also often reveal information when we're engaging in speech play without realizing it, because we'll kind of we'll reveal more than we gain because of how we're talking, what we're doing. And so it's something that I think just in general with the psychology of the thing, you have to be careful.
It's all contextual. Any poker tell speech play, it's all about semantic context, so to speak.
For sure. On that note, Nate, shall we switch gears and talk about AI and the news from last week, which got buried because there's a lot of news in the news. There's a lot of news in the news these days, Nate. That's a very deep insight.
Yeah, you got Jeffrey Epstein from the podcast. No, I'm just kidding. You've got Coldplay. What you got? The Big Beautiful Bill that was a couple weeks ago now. Yeah, I don't know. I'm working on an NFL model. That's exciting. I'm obsessed now with football.
Oh,
yeah.
Why?
Because it'll be fun. It'll drive traffic and subscriptions. I think there's a need for a better public-facing model than what's out there in the domain, right? Yeah, I like sports, Maria. I'm a red-blooded American. I like my football. Been playing some football video games as an inspiration.
I love that there was the video games after that, because at first I were like, I've been playing some football. I'm like, wait, what? We need an episode just on this. All right. So last week, President Trump released the AI action plan that talks about what the administration wants to kind of see going forward in the AI space. And I think the name of this action plan is actually quite telling about the contents. It says Winning the Race, America's AI Action Plan. So it's titled Winning the Race. And that's how it's framed, right? It's framed as a race between the US and everyone else, especially China, but really everyone else.
Mostly China.
Mostly China, but mostly
There's
China.
not really like a third.
Yeah. No, there isn't. And the overall point of all of the different sections is how can we make the US the leader in AI, the most competitive, and how can we do that by also kind of screwing over China in some respects by not allowing it access to the types of things that will allow our allies to access. And some of the things in it are contradictory, but that's kind of the overall message. Did you read the report, Nate? Do you have any initial thoughts?
I did not. I read, so Zvi Mowshowitz is one of the most prominent and best AI bloggers. He writes at the Substack, Don't Worry About the Vase. And he calls it, as he sees it, he's more concerned about P-Doom than a lot of people. P-Doom is the possibility of things going really badly, extinction, loss of control, etc. And he said he thought the plan was actually, his term, pretty good. I don't know his politics in detail, but he really dives down into like every last word. You can read that. So I'm kind of relying on that for like general vibes, right? I mean, it is interesting that like even people who are concerned, like Zvi, about AI safety, deeply concerned in his case, have this ambiguous relationship with China, right? Where if we were the only country developing AI and we had like centralized control, then it would be easier to argue that, okay, let's be appropriately cautious here, take it slow, right? With China, you know, a lot of people, I don't want to attribute a view to him, do think that, well, we have no choice but to race and maybe we can race in ways that involve some degree of coordination or cooperation. It's hard to run races like that, but like, but you know, I mean, the notion of like securing American leadership instead of ceding it to China, I don't think is terribly controversial. I mean, there's a lot in the plan, though, right? There are some Trumpian elements around factors like the political orientation of AI models, right?
Yeah.
Where they don't want them to be too woke. They don't want them to be too political, quote unquote, right?
Yeah, which is one of the things.
Which is hard.
Which is hard, and which is one of the things that Zvi does point out. Because I read this as well. It's one of the things that he points out is actually probably not possible given the type of language that Trump employs, and that as a psychologist, I would say is not possible given how AI is developed, because there's bias everywhere, and there's no such thing as like this is the objective thing. And if you're constantly policing, quote unquote, anti-woke, even if that's kind of the unbiased position, but you're like, oh no, that's, you know, that then you're going to, it's problematic. It's problematic in terms of how you go about it.
Yeah, with Grok, or more technically, the Twitter bot Grok, which is an instance of Elon's overall model Grok, right? Elon just did a couple of like subtle things. It was like, oh, don't be too woke here. Don't trust the media too much, right? Like if you read the actual changes to the architecture, they weren't that profound. And yet Grok was calling itself, I believe the term is Mecha Hitler, after some period of time, engaging in elaborate rape fantasies. I wish this were a joke, but it's not. And like, so yeah, I mean, if you kind of nudge a model to override its inputs, it's hard to do so in a way that like has any type of dexterity. I mean, Google had this problem too, right? When they came up with Gemini 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah, we talked
about
like,
it. Oh my gosh, yeah. There's too many like white men in these photos. So like literally it was forced to draw like multiracial Nazis. It always comes down to Nazis. And by the way, why? Well, in part because like if you're kind of mining text of arguments on the internet and on Twitter, people invoke Nazi comparisons all the time, right? Who's the hawk? Sydney Sweeney, right? There was a new American Eagle commercial where like she's in a pair of jeans and she talks about how she has good genes. A little weird, right? But like people are like,
it was kind of weird.
Nazi. It was a little weird. However, idiots on the internet were like, this has Nazi symbolism in it, not just alluding to that, saying the word Nazi. So if you're like Grok, you're like, okay, well, you want like kind of the garden variety political epithet and calling people Nazi or Hitler, which should be more forbidden, you would think, but that taboo is violated all the time. And so an AI trained on political speech, if you go and say, yeah, don't be so woke here, right? Well, it can kind of go into like a downward spiral, like some people do, where before long it's calling everybody or itself Hitler.
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely true. And, it also, your point actually makes a broader point about this AI action plan, where a lot of the things, and I did skim through it, I didn't read the whole thing word for word. It is small print on 28 pages, and I had other things to do this week, such as prepare for the Heads Up Championship, so I didn't read the whole thing. But a lot of it actually, like, there are things that sound reasonable in theory, but there's no practical way of like, how is this actually going to happen? How do we make this happen? And you will, I think that this is a very concrete, this like anti-woke is a very concrete example where like, okay, well, even if in theory we're saying we want everything to just be unbiased, let's just remove anti-woke, right? We want everything to be like as unbiased as possible. Let's pretend that that's actually what it said, even though it didn't. It did use the terminology anti-woke, and then there's even an anti-woke executive order after it. But let's pretend it didn't. Like, let's just pretend it was, we do not want bias. Great. I agree with that. How do you implement it? Like, how do you actually like do those weights? It's basically impossible. If not, like, it's a ridiculously thorny problem. Right. And that is just a very specific thing that you can kind of grab onto to realize how a lot of these statements might sound good and like, okay, well, this is a reasonable aim, but if you don't actually have the implementation down and the nitty gritty of how to do it, it's pointless. It's just words. It's just rhetoric. There's another really interesting part of this action plan that I think we should talk about, because it was something that the Biden administration also struggled with, which is, what do we do in terms of proprietary versus open source models, right? Yeah. Do we encourage people to kind of share all the code so that anyone can use it and anyone can kind of build on top of it? Or is this something that we want to kind of keep inside, kind of keep internal? China went open source, right, almost immediately with kind of DeepSeek, all of that. Those are open source models. And in the US, the Biden administration didn't really they just punted on it. They didn't have a position. And we do have both, right? We have proprietary models, we have some open source stuff. And people who are, one of there are arguments on both sides, but you had started off by talking about PDoom, which is not something this report mentions at all. And one of the arguments against having everything be open source is, well, okay, great, but then, rogue actors, people who don't have the best interests of the United States in mind, will have this code as well. It's kind of the same arguments that have been made in the past with like when people provide the full genomic sequence of like deadly viruses, right? Or things like that, where you're like, hey, or, instructions for how to build kind of a bomb with step by step. Like, hey guys, why are we actually making all of this information publicly available? So that's kind of, I think, the strongest case against open source. There's a lot of pro. Let's talk about con first. Yeah.
Well, look, I think part of it was, there's a period of time where I think the AI safety folks thought that, hey, maybe we could just kind of contain it to OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, or have been like the big three, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe that we can avoid like a race dynamic if there's a finite number of players and they all believe in AI safety, right? And I think now, there's like less belief that like OpenAI in particular is that concerned about AI safety, despite its alleged mission, right? B, we've seen with DeepSeek, the Chinese model, that like with some clever engineers, you can probably have a model that's like only 6 months to a year behind the frontier, probably not on the frontier. So attitudes have changed, again, kind of as a resignation to the inevitability, I think, in part. And also, there is some protectionism, right? Like, if you think you have, so Meta has championed open models. Why? Well, partly because Meta's models don't suck, but they've been considered behind to the point where they're literally offering people, AI engineers, in one case, allegedly, according to Wired, as much as $1 billion to join Meta so they can catch up and become like a fourth part of the big four, I guess it would be, right? Look, when it comes to election analysis and other models, oftentimes I found the people in that space who are advocating for total open source everything are people that like, A, don't need the income, or B, their models kind of suck, right? And they're like, we're doing this really good in the community. It's like, well, you're doing that because it's not really good enough to sell that product for a premium price, whereas I think mine is, for example, right? So like there are all types of ulterior motives. There's regulatory capture, right? Of course, Sam Altman might say, well, yeah, we have to be regulated. We can't have any mom and pop shop running an AI model. So therefore, just us three, right? Just us, Google, and Anthropic, and therefore we capture all the market share in perpetuity.
So the incentives here are definitely not as aligned as one might think, and I think you're also kind of subtly raising another point here, which is that in general, and stop me if you disagree, but it seems like over the last year, sure, like people are worried about AI and like PDoom and all of this, but it seems like that discourse has actually quieted down, and instead people are like,
yeah,
let's be more competitive with China. Okay, fuck it. Like let's try to push to like do what we can to like to make it really good. And I think that people have actually just, maybe it's because they've become just more used to having AI, whatever it is, it feels like the safety concerns have taken kind of a secondary role to capitalistic and competitive instincts.
I think there is maybe some view that like this year has not seen as much progress in AI timelines as people would have thought back in January. That might be debated. I mean, I think people are also like a little reluctant to talk about this in the AI safety community because they don't want to make it seem like their guards are down, right? But that's my sense, right? Almost more about what's being kind of unsaid. Now, also people can get bored of saying the same thing over and over. There's a new book out very soon about how AI is going to kill everybody if we don't learn how to control it quickly, right? From people, Eliezer Yudkowsky, Nate Silver, who are doomers, but very smart people, widely respected. Maybe we'll have one of them on at some point. I don't know, right? But yeah, and I think there's just kind of like also maybe a view that like, okay, this technology is interesting and economically powerful and kind of fun, right? And so we can't talk about the same thing all the time. I don't know. That's my impression.
Yeah, whatever the case is, whatever's going on behind the scenes, I do feel like, well, this report, the AI report, didn't really mention it at all, right? Like there was very little talk about safety or concerns, and there was some hand waving to like, oh, if anything seems like it's, getting bad, we'll fix it. But
even Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill last year called SB something.
Yeah.
I don't know which number it was, right?
I remember.
That would have regulated all the AI labs in California, since they all currently have substantial economic nexus in California. They would have all have been affected by it. So I don't know, right? Maybe it's like a lot of things where something really bad has to happen, and what people like Eliezer are concerned about, that by the time the bad things happen, it's too late, right? Again, I'm skeptical of the idea of like a super intelligence explosion, quote unquote. We talked in the poker episode a month or so ago about how like AI progress has been patchier. It's already superhuman in some areas. It's kind of deficient in others, right? And as a near daily user of these products, right? I mean, there are times where I think it's thinking and being very smart, and times when it can't fucking add two numbers together, right? And so. Like in some ways, the Grok thing was scarier than like the Google thing because like Elon had like very relatively gentle changes to the architecture, produced these profound changes where it was literally calling itself Mecha Hitler in outputs, right? At the same time, that gets to the race dynamic, right? That model had not been, because, what happens, you program an AI, right? You train it, you give it a system prompt, and then you test it, right? And whenever it says Hitler, you say, no, you're being a bad boy. If it's not in the context of World War II or something, then please don't mention Hitler so much, right? And it, if you spank it really hard, it learns to avoid that, right? But if you're just kind of updating the prompt, testing it with two of your buddies, and then releasing it, you might miss those. So there is fundamentally a trade-off between speed and safety, right? It's maybe not a one-for-one trade-off, but it's probably pretty inversely correlated.
It is. And you and I also talked about that, it's funny because a lot of the trade-offs that they illustrated there, right? The speed and safety, and that they predicted that like wanting to compete with China would make us potentially make that trade-off for speed. That is kind of, I see echoes of that in what is actually happening. I'm not saying that to be like,
look, and even their optimistic scenario involved kind of where we are right now with China, and then later on being like, okay, these AIs are starting to use language that's not intelligible to humans. We have to work with China, but even then, in their scenarios, we kind of have some like implicit leverage with China because we're like, well, we could just crush you if we wanted to, right? It might also destroy humanity, but we're ahead. And so you don't have too much free will here in China, right? And so yeah, it's complicated.
It is quite complicated. And by the way, in the Grok example, I think it's also interesting that some of the coding that was revealed said also to check what Elon Musk thinks about this, right, before giving your answer. And this was not a blip, like multiple people replicated that this was actually in the coding. So you do have to, and as you've already said, like OpenAI said before that it was, safety first, and that's clearly not the case. And they've shown that to not be the case. So I think we do need to keep asking questions about incentives, about alignment, and about kind of who's benefiting from what type of advances in the AI community.
Yeah, I mean, the AIs it felt to me like Grok kind of almost took on like a personality or became like kind of a self-caricature, right? Where it can be recursive, right? If it's like searching output on X, including its own output, right? It might say, okay, this is how Grok behaves, and like, let me be careful about this. I mean, Grok can kind of be, in a dark way, kind of funny, whereas the other A models are not, right? They're kind of goody two-shoes, aiming to please. Oh, that's the most brilliant article I've ever seen, Nate. Here are 27 typos if I give it a copy edit task, right? And this is a counter to that, but like all these things are tied together, right? Like wokeness is also tied to kind of a certain type of academic expertise, you know what I mean? Which I call the indigo blob, how like, yeah, the liberal media is biased and liberal, but also it's generally more accurate and has more expertise than the conservative media. Both those things are true. If you crunch a bunch of data in from the internet into vectors, then that gets hard, right? It gets hard because like you can't necessarily, you might throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? That you want to like have it reflect the expert consensus. Well, the experts have bias. It sometimes creeps into that consensus, right? And it's very hard for, again, for newsrooms and journalistic institutions to do it, but just as hard for AI models.
Yeah, and as AI models become more integrated and become kind of more a part of the way that people do work, and we see more outputs from AI models and their training materials shift, like these are things that can become even worse kind of in the future. It is kind of this cycle that can self-reinforce.
And by the way, I don't want people thinking that like an AI is like a oracular,
it's not
perfect entity either, right? Paul Krugman had a thing about like Grok a couple of weeks ago where he's like, well, if AI has a liberal bias, it's because reality has a liberal bias, right? And I'm like, well, maybe on some things, but like, and he's actually pretty skeptical of AI. Like that's not, look at any algorithm Yeah, an LLM is probably too complicated to describe as an algorithm. It has like some emergent behaviors, but still, directionally speaking, right? Any algorithm is imperfect. You know what I mean? It
Yeah,
can
for
make
sure.
bad predictions, can reflect bad data, and the AIs, especially if they're not fine tuned,
Yeah.
which requires human input, right? That's how they're fine tuned.
Yes.
They have like a bunch of people being like, yes, no, yes, no. Then I mean, I think garbage in, garbage out is not quite the right case, but like
No,
that's
but
yeah,
directionally speaking, that points to what we're talking about, which is that the inputs really, really do matter. And I think the other thing is that there is this human bias to think that, oh, well, this is data, this is a machine, so it's
yeah.
more
I
unbiased because it's not human. And that's simply not true. It is just, and if we have that bias to say, oh, well, this is objective truth because it's coming from it's coming from a program, that ain't where that ain't where it's at. Like that is actually a highly problematic way of thinking.
yeah, and look, and what its objectives aren't clear, right? I mean,
No.
in one sense, large language models are trying to minimize the loss function from accurately reflecting what's represented in the data. On the other hand, it's contradicted by the human feedback that it gets, right? And so it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
trying to please its creators to whatever extent it can, to the point of being kind of a sycophant in some cases. So like, and I think people understand more about interpreting AI outputs than they did a year or two or three ago. But it can be fragile. Small things can affect the entire system, right?
Absolutely.
It's complexity. It's a kind of origin of complexity theory. Really, is well reflected in AI, where a butterfly flaps its wings in Beijing. There's a tornado in Texas, right? Elon puts one change to the system prompt in place. It doesn't seem to matter, but when you put that change in, and then you say, oh, also, please make sure you're reading what Elon would write, right? Those things combined can have a profound effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is just something that's visible. Now imagine all the things that are invisible right behind the scenes, like tiny tweaks like that we don't see because it's not actually visible in like your immediate LLM output, unless you really try to kind of find
No,
it.
and we
So
moved away from transparency in general. I
yeah,
mean, not
we
just in
did.
Google's AI, Gemini, but like in Google search, there's a lot of intervention, right? That if you search
Yeah.
for occupations, just in regular Google search for photos of like doctors, it will be very conscientious to show. I mean, there might be more women doctors now. But it will show like doctors of all races and women doctors, right? If you search for hockey player, it'll make sure. I mean, there are some great black hockey players, right? But it's a lot of white Canadian and European kids, right? And yeah, the notion of, oh, the web is just a search, right? Or large language models are just kind of a neutral presentation of a clever way to like matricize internet data and writing. I mean, it's never been that. And the consensus has moved away from transparency, if anything,
Yeah.
almost toward like, well, if we're transparent, hyper transparent, that'll just give you more things to critique or to pick on. And so sorry,
Yep.
if you like the model, then use it. If you don't like it, then, well, use a different model instead.
Yeah, and there is this tension here once again with going back to what we were talking about with open source, right? Like there's definitely this tension between open source, the good things, and that's actually some of the good stuff of transparency, right? That you can actually look at the inputs and actually try to figure out what's going
Oh
on.
yeah,
Are they like that's one of the benefits of having open source transparent models that people can kind of pick apart and play with. We've talked about kind of the risks, PDOOM, et cetera, but there are benefits, and transparency is certainly one of them.
yeah. There've been many times when we've had models of different kinds running, right? And people are like, this seems wrong, right? Why is this poll weighted a certain way? And like
Yep.
80% of the time, it's partisan BS, but 20% of the time they've caught something for sure,
Yeah,
right? And
for
even like,
sure.
even for myself, if I have a model, making sure I output different data at different stages to
Hmm.
evaluate it. If you don't catch a problem early on when you're building a complex, like this NFL thing I'm working on, right? There are
Hmm.
lots of component parts. So there'll eventually be a couple thousand lines of code, none of
Hmm.
which individually are that complicated. But if there's one step that's wrong, it can infect the entire system,
Yeah.
right? And if you're smart, you build in robustness and redundancy every major computer program has bugs, every model has bugs, right? But outputting that and being like, I want to visualize this, I want to look at the right inputs, right? I want to look at edge cases that are important. Like that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, one of the big, to kind of defend open source, that's one of the big things about data integrity just everywhere is open source is good, right? So there was huge crisis in academia with, with cheating, with fabricating data, with papers that were published in important journals with big results that ended up being manipulated. And so there's more and more of a movement toward, not just pre-registering your study, but sharing your data, right? Like actually sharing the data sets so that people can look at what the source material was. And, like one of the biggest scandals that we talked about briefly on the show with Dan Ariely and Francesca Gino, they showed that some of those data sets were manipulated, but that was only after they were forced to provide the data sets, after some eagle-eyed researchers were like, hey, like what we're seeing in the paper doesn't make sense. And sometimes it's willful manipulation and sometimes it's just a mistake, right? There have been there was one very famous scientific study where they fucked up an Excel sheet where they by mistake moved the rows down by one, and that just completely, it was horrific because this is a medical study, right? So actually tiny things like that, it's incredibly important to have access to the raw data to be able to look at this, to manipulate it on your own. People can really spot both malfeasance and just human error, which will happen. And with AI, we'll have both human error and computer error, right? As we're having AIs do coding for us, vibe coding, all of that. There might be errors there. We need people capable of looking at it, debugging, and trying to figure out, hey, this seems like it's working great, but actually it's not.
A well-designed model, including a large language model, is kind of like a airplane, right? There are like multiple redundant systems. There are different levels of safety and safeguards, and that's hard to do. It requires a lot of work and expensive budget and being an actually good programmer.
One of the other major things that I saw in this action plan that I think is actually quite important, and again, there are arguments on both sides, is one of the big bottlenecks to AI development is energy, right? Because AI just takes a huge energy cost. And and access to data centers, that's actually been a big thing where data centers can't, they've tried to bypass the power grids. There's been, pushback, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that this plan tries to do is say, let's eliminate all the barriers and let's try to use all the energy we have available for AI.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think this is a little overclaimed, right? If you look at the amount of actual wattage required to run a ChatGPT response, it's this is kind of I don't know. It's a fairly bullshitty claim based on the present capabilities of AI.
So, Nate, let me just push back a little bit because there's a related issue, which is the availability of water to cool these data centers. And we have already seen that there have been instances of town wells running dry. There's been instances of construction having to be paused because because of basically water shortage issues. So I think that that's a related concern that we shouldn't just dismiss.
I think you're getting this from woke AI, Maria.
Maybe Grok. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah,
I think it is a big deal.
I'm skeptical of. It's not relative to other uses of electricity, though. It's a small piece of the pie. And now, granted, Sam Altman et al. Want to be bigger, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I'm not going to say something and have it not be true. So I'm not going to engage that point because I just honestly don't know. However, it is something that this bill is trying to address and trying to give AI companies whatever resources it needs to access power grids, access energy grids, so that data centers can be built on federal land and kind of allow innovation to proceed without there being an energy bottleneck. I think that that's kind of objectively what this bill is trying to accomplish.
By the standards of Trump, it's a pretty serious document. Though I think the one good thing about their alliance, maybe not the only good thing, right, with the kind of tech right, is that they do, I think, have like competent people in place who might have different position on AI, but like this isn't an amateurish document. It's thoughtful. It involves politics, but like there was some care put into this.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Very unlike Trump in most ways.
I agree. I agree. Reading it, obviously you can see the Trumpian language in parts of it, but I think there are nuanced points here where it will be interesting to see how, if at all, any of this is enforced and kind of what ends up happening. I think we'll just have to see over the next 6 months, 1 year, and see how a lot of these provisions shake out. By the way, there are a lot more provisions. We're not going to talk about the whole thing. Nate, as you said, Zvi has a good Substack on this. So for people who want to know more, I think we'd both encourage you to read that. But yeah, all in all, some things where you're like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Some things that are a little, eyebrow raising, not enough, I think, not enough care shown to, or not care, that's the wrong word, but I think we're seeing speed over safety in a lot of this, and how do we facilitate speed instead of safety. So I think that to me is the big thing to kind of watch out for and to keep an eye on.